Across the galaxy, a billion worlds celebrated. The mighty Galactic Armada had finally crushed the last pockets of resistance in the Outer Rim. Victory parades filled every major spaceport from Centauri Prime to the vegan colonies. The war was over. Peace would reign supreme under the iron fist of the Galactic Council. But, in the depths of space, where no celebration reached, something stirred in the darkness. Ancient engines that had slumbered for decades began to hum with terrible purpose. Weapons that could shatter moons powered up for the first time in a generation. And, from a small, blue world that the galaxy had forgotten, a world called Earth, came a transmission that would turn triumph into terror. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We've been watching. We've been waiting. And, now, we're coming. The Armada had celebrated too soon. Earth's war dreadnoughts were about to remind the galaxy why humanity had never truly been conquered, only ignored. The golden spires of Centauri Prime gleamed under the artificial suns that bathed the capital world of the Galactic Council. Millions of beings from across the galaxy had gathered to witness the greatest celebration in recorded history. The Galactic Armada had finally achieved what many thought impossible: total victory over the rebellious Outer Rim territories. Supreme Chancellor Vexstar stood on the crystalline balcony of the Council Tower, his forearms spread wide as he addressed the cheering masses below. His metallic blue skin caught the light as his voice boomed through translation matrices that carried his words to every corner of the galaxy. "Citizens of the galaxy," he proclaimed, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Today marks the end of chaos. Today marks the beginning of eternal order. The last rebel strongholds have fallen. The Outer Rim burns with the righteous fire of justice. Never again will piracy, rebellion, or chaos threaten the peace we have built." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Beings of 100 different species raised their voices, claws, tentacles, and appendages in celebration. The Zephyrian bird people trilled their haunting victory songs while the massive Goliath-class beings from the heavy world stomped their feet in rhythm. Even the usually reserved crystalline collective pulsed with bright, joyful colors. In the harbor above the capital, the Galactic Armada's finest warships hung in formation like deadly jewels against the star-filled sky. The flagship, the Inevitable Victory, stretched nearly 10 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was adorned with the conquest marks of 1,000 battles, each one a world brought under Council rule. Surrounding it were hundreds of other vessels: battle cruisers, destroyers, carrier ships, and the feared Dominator-class dreadnoughts that had broken the spine of rebel resistance across the rim. Admiral Karath, Supreme Commander of the Armada, stood in the bridge of the Inevitable Victory, watching the celebrations below through the massive viewports. His reptilian features were set in what passed for satisfaction among his species. The campaign had taken 3 years and cost millions of lives, but the result was worth it. The galaxy was finally unified under one rule, one law, one vision of order. "Admiral," called out his second-in-command, Captain THYSS. "We're receiving congratulatory messages from across the core worlds. The Senate of Rigel, the Trade Consortium of Vega, even the isolationist sphere builders have sent their regards." "As they should," Karath replied, his voice a low rumble. 3 centuries of expansion, 2 centuries of consolidation, and now this. The galaxy belongs to us completely. No corner remains outside our influence." But, even as he spoke these words, something nagged at the back of his mind. A memory from the old archives, something his predecessor had mentioned during his ascension to command. There had been other campaigns, other worlds that had resisted. Most were crushed immediately, but a few. "Sir," THYSS continued, consulting his datapad. "Final casualty reports from the Rim campaign are coming in. Total losses: 4 million Armada personnel, 67 capital ships, 300 smaller vessels. Rebel losses are estimated at 50 million across all Rim worlds." Karath nodded grimly. The numbers were acceptable, even low by historical standards. The rebels had fought with desperate courage, but courage meant little against the overwhelming technological superiority of the Armada. Their ramshackle fleets of converted cargo haulers and outdated warships had been swept aside like debris before a solar wind. "And the worlds themselves?" he asked. "Completely pacified, sir. Orbital bombardment protocols were successfully implemented on 17 holdout worlds. The rest surrendered when they witnessed the fate of the others. All remaining populations have been relocated to the re-education facilities on Gamma Proxima. The celebrations continued below, but Korath found himself walking to the rear of the bridge, where a massive star chart displayed the entirety of known space. The galaxy was vast, 400 billion stars, millions of inhabited worlds, countless races and species all now united under the Council's rule. The core worlds, shown in gold, formed the heart of civilization. The middle territories, in blue, represented the industrial and agricultural backbone of the Empire. And, now, finally, the rim territories glowed green, pacified, conquered, brought into the fold. Yet there, in the far corner of the rim, was a small cluster of stars that had always bothered him. They were marked in white on the chart unexplored, or rather, ignored. The system was so far out on the edge of the galaxy that it had never been considered worth the effort to investigate. The few scout ships that had been sent in that direction over the centuries had either returned with reports of nothing interesting, or hadn't returned at all. "Captain THYSS," he called. "What do our records show about the Sol system?" THYSS manipulated his control interface, calling up archived data. "Sol system, sir? Located in grid reference Omega 7-7 Alpha. 9 planets, one inhabited by a primitive species called humans. Last survey was conducted 437 years ago. The species was classified as pre-industrial, no threat, low priority for contact." "No contact since then?" "According to records, no sir. The system is so far from any major trade routes or strategic resources that it was deemed not worth the expense of regular monitoring. There were a few mentions in exploration logs of some unusual energy signatures, but nothing that warranted investigation." Korath stared at the white dot on the map. 437 years. That was a long time, even by galactic standards. Species could evolve significantly in that time span, especially if they were at the cusp of industrialization when last observed. "Sir, is something wrong?" THYSS asked, noticing his commander's prolonged silence. "Perhaps not," Korath replied slowly. "But, in my experience, Captain, the corners we forget to watch are often the ones that surprise us most. Make a note to schedule a survey mission to the Sol system within the next standard year. It's time we completed our maps properly." Below them, the celebration reached its crescendo as Supreme Chancellor Vextar raised the scepter of absolute authority, a ceremonial weapon that symbolized the Council's power over all life in the galaxy. The crowds roared their approval as holographic displays showed the final moments of rebel resistance being crushed on the rim worlds. But, far across the galaxy, in the darkness of the space around the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star, something stirred. Ancient sensors that had remained hidden and dormant for centuries suddenly came online. Deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, in hardened bunkers that had been built during humanity's last Great War, banks of computers began processing the signals they were receiving from across the galaxy. The transmissions were clear. The Galactic Armada had completed its conquest of the rim territories. The entire galaxy was now under the control of a single, unified government. And, from the intercepted communications, it was clear that this government ruled through fear, oppression, and the complete subjugation of any species that refused to submit. In the depths of the Cheyenne Mountain complex, now expanded into a vast underground city, Admiral Sarachin studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. At 55, she was one of the youngest admirals in the history of the Terran Defense Force, but she had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. Her ancestors had fought in the resource wars that had nearly destroyed Earth 3 centuries ago. They had learned the hard lessons of what happened when aggressive empires went unchecked. "Admiral," reported Commander Marcus Webb, her intelligence chief. "The signals are clear. This Galactic Council has now absorbed every major civilization in the local galactic arm. Their military force is massive, we estimate over 50,000 capital ships, with supporting fleets that number in the hundreds of thousands." Shen nodded grimly. She had feared this day would come. When humanity had first detected the expansion of the Galactic Council 4 centuries ago, they had made a fateful decision. Rather than make contact and risk immediate conquest, they had chosen to hide. To wait. To watch. And to prepare. What's the status of our own fleet? She asked. All ships are fully operational, Admiral. The Warfather, Retribution, and Defiance are ready for immediate deployment. The Earthbreaker and Voidkiller are completing final systems checks. All support vessels are at full readiness. Chen stood and walked to the massive viewscreen that dominated one wall of the command center. It showed a view of space above Earth's North Pole, where 5 enormous shapes hung in formation. They were unlike any ships that had ever sailed the void before, angular, brutal, and built for only one purpose. These were humanity's war dreadnoughts, the ultimate expression of 4 centuries of military preparation. Each ship stretched 15 kilometers from bow to stern, nearly half again as large as the biggest vessels in the Galactic Armada. But size was only the beginning. These ships had been designed by a species that had perfected the art of warfare through centuries of conflict on their own world. Every system, every weapon, every piece of armor had been tested in the crucible of human ingenuity and refined through generations of improvement. Admiral, Webb continued, long-range sensors are picking up increased activity in the nearby systems. It appears the Galactic Council is beginning to consolidate their gains from the Rim campaign. Intelligence suggests they may begin exploring previously ignored regions of space. How long before they reach us? Based on their expansion patterns, perhaps 6 months. Maybe less if they decide to accelerate their exploration schedule. Chen took a deep breath. For centuries of preparation. For centuries of building, training, and waiting. Humanity had used that time well. While the galaxy had been consumed by expansion and conquest, Earth had become something unique, a world where every citizen was a potential soldier, where every factory could be converted to war production in a matter of days, where the entire population had been psychologically and physically prepared for the conflict that everyone knew would eventually come. Send a message to all fleet commanders, she ordered. Operation Homecoming is now active. All ships are to report to their designated coordinates and await further orders. And, Captain? Yes, Admiral? Send a coded transmission to our agents in the Centauri system. I want to know everything about this victory celebration. Numbers, positions, defensive capabilities. If we're going to introduce ourselves to the galaxy, we might as well make it memorable. As Chen's orders were relayed across the solar system, the 5 war dreadnoughts began to move. Their massive engines, powered by controlled antimatter reactions, lit up the void with brief stars. Around them, hundreds of smaller vessels emerged from hidden bases on asteroids, on the dark sides of moons, and from the depths of the outer system where they had waited in cold storage. The Terran Defense Force was awakening from its long slumber. And, across the galaxy, the celebration continued, unaware that the balance of power was about to shift in ways that none of them could imagine. In the archives deep beneath the command center, ancient video records played on loop footage of the last great war that had nearly destroyed Earth. Images of cities burning, of desperate last stands, of the moment when humanity had looked into the abyss and decided that they would never again be caught unprepared. The lessons of that war had shaped everything that came after. Never again would humanity be victims. Never again would they wait for someone else to determine their fate. When the galaxy had turned toward conquest and empire, humanity had turned toward preparation and patience. They had become something that the galaxy had never seen before, a species that had unified not through conquest, but through the shared understanding that freedom was worth any price. The celebrations on Centauri Prime continued into the night, with beings from across the galaxy toasting their triumph over chaos and rebellion. They believed they had won the ultimate victory, that peace and order would reign forever under their benevolent rule. They had no idea that in the darkness beyond their farthest outposts, humanity was about to teach them the difference between conquest and war. 3 weeks after the great celebration, the exploration vessel Cosmic Seeker drifted through the outer reaches of the Sol system. Captain Zexhai, a methodical Andromedan with silver-scaled skin and for eyes that could see across multiple spectrums, had volunteered for this assignment personally. While his colleagues celebrated their victories in the core worlds, he preferred the quiet solitude of exploration. The Sol system had been on the exploration backlog for decades, but the recent victory had freed up resources for such secondary missions. Initial scans from the edge of the system had shown exactly what the ancient records indicated: 9 planets orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, with what appeared to be a thriving civilization on the Third World. "Captain," reported his sensor officer, Lieutenant Kethmore. "We're detecting significant technological development on the third planet. Much more advanced than our historical records indicate." Zexhi's interest peaked. It wasn't unusual for primitive species to advance during the centuries between surveys, but something about the readings seemed off. "Specify the advancements." "Nuclear technology, sir. Primitive fusion reactors. Electromagnetic communications across the planet's surface. Some orbital infrastructure, satellites, small space stations. The species appears to have achieved basic spaceflight capabilities." "Interesting," Zexhi mused, settling into his command chair. "Still well within acceptable parameters for first contact protocols." "What's their population level?" "Approximately 8 billion individuals across the planet's surface, sir. Concentrated in large urban centers but with significant agricultural distribution. No signs of overpopulation stress or resource depletion wars." Zexhi nodded approvingly. Species that managed to avoid destroying themselves during their industrial development phase often made excellent additions to the Galactic Council. They could be integrated gradually, their technology improved through Council guidance, their population utilized for various colonial and industrial projects. "Take us closer, Lieutenant. Begin standard first contact assessment protocols." The Cosmic Seeker was not a warship, but rather a specialized exploration vessel designed for exactly these kinds of missions. At 3 kilometers long, it was impressive by the standards of most primitive species, and its advanced sensors could analyze everything from atmospheric composition to technological capabilities without being detected. As they moved deeper into the system, passing the gas giants of the outer system, Zexhi began to notice anomalies in the sensor readings. There were metallic signatures scattered throughout the asteroid belt that didn't match natural formation patterns. Energy readings that seemed too regular, too organized to be natural phenomena. "Captain," Kethmore called out, his voice tinged with confusion. "I'm detecting some unusual signatures in the asteroid belt. Multiple metallic objects, each roughly 50 to 100 meters in length. They appear to be artificial constructs." "Mining operations?" Zexhi suggested. It was common for developing species to establish asteroid mining facilities once they achieved basic spaceflight. "Possibly, sir, but the distribution pattern is strange. They're positioned in a grid formation that extends throughout the belt. It's almost like..." "Like what, Lieutenant?" "Like a sensor network, sir. Or a defensive perimeter." Zexhi felt a chill run down his spine. Defensive perimeters were not something primitive species typically constructed. They required advanced materials science, sophisticated computer networks, and, most importantly, a reason to expect attack from space. Species that had never encountered alien life rarely built such systems. "Increase sensor intensity," he ordered. "I want a complete analysis of those constructs." As the Cosmic Seeker's more powerful sensors focused on the asteroid belt, the readings became even more disturbing. The objects weren't just sensors, they were weapons platforms. Each one contained what appeared to be kinetic accelerators capable of launching projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. The network coverage was complete, meaning nothing larger than a small asteroid could pass through the belt without being detected and, potentially engaged. "Captain," Kethmore reported, his voice now openly concerned. "The energy signatures from the third planet are also anomalous. I'm reading massive underground installations on multiple continents. Power generation levels that far exceed what should be possible for their apparent technological level." "Show me," Zexhi commanded. The main viewscreen flickered to life, displaying a detailed image of the third planet Earth. From space, it appeared unremarkable. Blue oceans, green and brown continents, white clouds swirling through the atmosphere. But, as the enhanced sensors revealed the hidden infrastructure, Zexhi's four eyes widened in alarm. Beneath the surface of every major continent were vast installations, some extending for hundreds of kilometers underground. The energy signatures suggested industrial complexes of staggering size, powered by what could only be fusion reactors of advanced design. But, most disturbing of all were the launch facilities, massive installations clearly designed to move large objects into space at high velocity. This is impossible, Zexhai whispered. The historical records show a pre-industrial species with primitive technology. This level of development should have taken millennia, not centuries. Sir, Kethmore interrupted urgently. I'm detecting movement from the dark side of their moon. Multiple large objects are changing position. The viewscreen shifted to focus on Earth's satellite. What they saw there made Zexhai's blood run cold. The moon wasn't just a natural satellite, it was honeycombed with artificial structures. Launch bays, docking facilities, and what could only be described as fortress installations dotted its surface. And, emerging from hidden bays were ships. But these weren't the primitive vessels Zexhai had expected. 5 massive constructs emerged from the lunar surface, each one larger than anything in the Cosmic Seeker's database. They moved with purposeful precision, their hulls reflecting starlight in patterns that suggested advanced armor and defensive systems. Captain, Kethmore's voice was barely a whisper now. Those ships, they're larger than our battlecruisers. Significantly larger. Zexhai's training kicked in. This was no longer an exploration mission, it was a reconnaissance mission in potentially hostile territory. Begin immediate withdrawal to the edge of the system. Send an emergency transmission to Fleet Command. Priority 1. But, as the Cosmic Seeker began to turn away from the inner system, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. Their navigation systems were being jammed by powerful electromagnetic interference. Their communications array was being flooded with signals that made interstellar communication impossible. Most terrifyingly of all, their engines were no longer responding to commands. Captain! Kethmore shouted over the alarm klaxons. We're caught in some kind of tractor field. Our engines are at full power, but we're not moving. On the main view screen, one of the massive ships from the moon was approaching rapidly. As it drew closer, its true size became apparent. The vessel was at least 15 kilometers in length, its hull bristling with weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. Its design was unlike anything in the galactic database: angular, aggressive, built for one purpose only. Incoming transmission, reported the communications officer. Put it through, Zexhai ordered, trying to maintain his composure despite the cold fear spreading through his chest. The viewscreen flickered, and, suddenly, Zexhai found himself looking at a being that was unmistakably one of the planet's inhabitants. The creature stood upright on 2 legs, with pale skin, dark hair, and only 2 eyes. But those eyes held an intelligence and determination that was immediately recognizable to any sapient species. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force, the being said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable undertone of authority. You are trespassing in protected space. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. Zexhai struggled to find his voice. The being spoke in perfect galactic standard, despite supposedly being a primitive species with no previous contact with galactic civilization. I am Captain Zexhai of the Galactic Council exploration vessel Cosmic Seeker. We are conducting a routine survey mission in accordance with standard first contact protocols. The human's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes grew harder. First contact protocols. Interesting terminology, Captain. Tell me, how many species has your Galactic Council made first contact with in the past century? The question was oddly specific, and Zexhai found himself answering truthfully without understanding why. 17 species, Admiral. All have been successfully integrated into the Council framework. And how many of those species chose integration willingly? Zexhai hesitated. The question seemed like a trap, but he could see no way around it. The integration process is complex. Some species require more persuasion than others to understand the benefits of Council membership. The human nodded slowly. We've been monitoring your communications, Captain. We know about your recent victory over the Rim territories. We know about the re-education facilities, the orbital bombardments, the 50 million dead. Your Council doesn't integrate species, Captain. It conquers them. The bridge of the Cosmic Seeker fell silent. How could this primitive species have been monitoring galactic communications? How could they know about classified military operations that had taken place thousands of light-years away? You seem surprised, Captain, the the human continued. Let me explain something to you. Humans have been aware of the Galactic Council for over 4 centuries. We've watched your expansion, studied your methods, analyzed your technology. We've had a very long time to prepare for this moment. Prepare for what? Zexai asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. For the day when your empire would turn its attention to us, Chen replied. You see, Captain, we've learned something about your species and the others in your council. You've grown soft. You've become accustomed to easy victories over divided, primitive worlds. You've never faced a unified species that's had centuries to prepare for your arrival. On the tactical display, more ships were emerging from hidden positions throughout the solar system. They appeared from asteroid bases, from behind the gas giants, from the depths of the outer system. Hundreds of vessels of various sizes, all bearing the same aggressive, angular design as the massive dreadnought that held the cosmic seeker in its grasp. How is this possible? Zexai whispered. Simple, Captain. While your council was busy conquering the galaxy, humanity was busy learning from your mistakes. We studied every species you absorbed, every battle you fought, every weakness you revealed. We've had 400 years to build a military doctrine specifically designed to counter your methods. Chen leaned forward slightly, and Zexai could see the cold calculation in her eyes. Your council rules through overwhelming force applied against divided, unprepared opponents. But, you've never faced a species that unified specifically to resist you. You've never fought an enemy that had centuries to study your tactics and develop countermeasures. Most importantly, you've never encountered a species that views personal freedom as more important than life itself. The Council has 50,000 warships, Zexai said desperately. Even if your technology is advanced, you cannot hope to match those numbers. Chen smiled, and the expression was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. Numbers, Captain? Let me tell you about numbers. Earth has a population of 8 billion humans. Every single one of them has been trained in military tactics from childhood. Every single one of them would rather die than submit to your council's rule. Our entire civilization has been optimized for one purpose: war. The viewscreen shifted to show images of Earth's surface. What had appeared to be normal cities from orbit were revealed to be massive fortified complexes. Every building was designed to withstand orbital bombardment. Every citizen was armed and trained. The entire planet was a fortress. But, Captain, Chen continued, you've given us something we couldn't have achieved on our own. By conquering the Rim territory so thoroughly, you've created millions of potential allies. Survivors who escaped the re-education facilities, resistance cells on occupied worlds, species that are tired of living under the Council's boot. They've been waiting for someone to light the spark of rebellion. Zexai realized with growing horror what the human was implying. You intend to attack the Council. Not attack, Captain. Liberate. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to understand it immediately. Chen's expression softened slightly. Your species isn't evil, Captain. Misguided, perhaps. Convinced that order and peace can only come through conquest and control. But, you've forgotten something that humanity learned through bitter experience. What? Zexai asked, despite himself. Peace imposed through force isn't peace at all, it's just delayed war. And, when that war finally comes, it burns hotter than any star. The transmission continued for several more minutes as Chen explained humanity's intentions. They would not simply defend themselves against Council expansion. They would actively work to dismantle the Empire, freeing every species that had been conquered, every world that had been subjugated. The war dreadnoughts emerging from hiding were just the beginning, the tip of a spear that had been forged over 4 centuries of preparation. When the transmission finally ended, Zexai found himself alone with his crew on a ship that was completely under human control. They were being escorted to a facility on the moon where they would be held as prisoners of war, treated well, according to human customs, but prevented from warning the Council of what they had discovered. As the cosmic seeker was guided toward the lunar surface, Zexai stared out at the growing fleet of human vessels. Each one represented a level of technology and military doctrine that the Council had never encountered. More than that, they represented something that the Council had systematically destroyed wherever they found it, the unified will of a free people determined to remain free. For the first time in his life, Zexai found himself wondering whether the Galactic Council's version of peace and order was worth the price that had been paid for it. And, as the human fleet prepared for what they were calling Operation Homecoming, he realized that the galaxy was about to find out the answer to that question whether it wanted to or not. The age of easy conquest was about to end. Humanity was about to introduce the galaxy to the concept of total war. Admiral Karath stood in the command center of the inevitable victory, staring at a blank communications screen that should have contained a routine report from the Cosmic Seeker. The exploration vessel had been dispatched to survey the Sol system 3 weeks ago and should have transmitted its initial findings days earlier. "Still no contact, Admiral," reported Captain THYSS, his reptilian features creased with concern. "The Cosmic Seeker's last transmission was received 17 days ago, indicating normal approach to the target system. Since then, complete silence." "Equipment failure?" Karath asked, though he knew it was unlikely. Council ships were built to exacting standards, with multiple redundant communication systems. "Possible, sir, but improbable. The Cosmic Seeker is a new vessel with state-of-the-art systems. For all communications to fail simultaneously would require catastrophic damage or..." THYSS paused. "Or what, Captain?" "Or deliberate jamming by an outside force." Karath felt the familiar tingle of unease that had served him well throughout his military career. In his experience, ships that disappeared while investigating primitive species usually encountered something that wasn't quite as primitive as expected. "Dispatch the battle group Sword of Justice to investigate," he ordered. "For heavy cruisers and a full complement of support vessels. If the Cosmic Seeker has encountered technical difficulties, they'll provide assistance. If they've encountered something else..." "Understood, sir. The Sword of Justice will depart within the hour." But Karatha's unease would prove to be prophetic. The Sword of Justice battle group, consisting of 4 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 30 support vessels, would never reach the Sol system. They would disappear completely in the void between stars, their fate unknown until much later. 3 days after the Sword of Justice failed to report in, emergency klaxons began sounding throughout the inevitable victory. Karath rushed to the bridge to find his crew in a state of controlled panic, staring at readings that seemed impossible. "Admiral," THYSS reported, his voice tight with stress. "We're detecting massive gravimetric distortions throughout the sector. Multiple objects dropping out of faster-than-light travel simultaneously." "How many objects?" Karath demanded. "Unknown, sir. The distortions are unlike anything in our database. Whatever's causing them, they're big. Very big." The main viewscreen flickered to life, showing the space around Centauri Prime. What Karath saw there defied belief. 5 enormous vessels had appeared in the outer system, each one larger than the biggest ship in the Galactic Armada. Their design was unlike anything in Council records, angular, brutal, covered in weapon emplacements that spoke of a military doctrine built around overwhelming firepower. "Sir," the sensor officer called out. "I'm reading energy signatures from those vessels that are off the scale. Their power generation capabilities exceed our largest battle stations." But, before Karath could respond, every communication system in the fleet began receiving the same transmission simultaneously. The signal was incredibly powerful, cutting through all other traffic and overriding every security protocol in the Council's communication network. The main viewscreen shifted to show a human female in a dark blue uniform marked with insignia that spoke of high military rank. Behind her, Karath could see the bridge of what was obviously a warship, with crew members working at stations that displayed technology far in advance of anything the Council possessed. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force," the human said, her voice carrying clearly across every ship in the system. "I am transmitting this message to every vessel in the Centauri system and to every world under the control of the so-called Galactic Council." Karath felt his blood turn to ice. How was this transmission being received everywhere simultaneously? The power requirements for such a feat were staggering, and the technological sophistication required was beyond anything the Council had achieved. "For 4 centuries, Chen continued, humanity has watched your empire expand across the galaxy. We have observed your methods of conquest, your treatment of subject species, your systematic destruction of freedom wherever you find it. We have seen the so-called peace you bring, the peace of the graveyard, purchased with the blood of billions. Throughout the bridge of the inevitable victory, Korath could see his crew exchanging shocked glances. The human was speaking of classified information, of military operations that were supposed to be secret. How could a species from the galactic rim have such detailed intelligence about Council operations? You call yourselves peacekeepers, Chen said, and Korath could hear the contempt in her voice. But we have another word for what you truly are, slavers. You have turned the galaxy into a vast plantation, with your council as the overseers and every other species as your property. The transmission shifted to show images that made Korath's stomach turn. Footage of the recent Rim campaign, but seen from the perspective of the civilians being bombarded from orbit. Children running from burning cities. Families being separated as the healthy adults were taken for integration while the elderly and infirm were left to die. Mass graves on world after world where resistance had been crushed. Where did they get this footage? THYSS whispered. We've been monitoring your communications, your military operations, your so-called integration procedures, Chen answered as if she had heard the question. Humanity has had 4 centuries to study your empire, and we have learned everything there is to know about your strengths, your weaknesses, and, most importantly, your crimes. The images shifted again, showing the massive human vessels in detail. Korath could see weapon systems of unknown design, armor that appeared to be composed of materials not found in any council database, and engines that generated power signatures that defied current understanding of physics. My name is Admiral Sarah Chen, the human repeated, and I speak for the 8 billion free humans of Earth, the most militarized civilization in the galaxy. We did not ask for this war, but you have brought it to us by your very existence. As long as your empire stands, no species can truly be free. Chen paused, and, when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Today, we begin the liberation of the galaxy. Every world you have conquered will be freed. Every species you have enslaved will be given the choice to determine its own destiny. Every monument to your empire will be torn down and replaced with monuments to those who died resisting you. This is impossible, Korath muttered. 5 ships cannot challenge the entire Galactic Armada. As if responding to his doubts, the transmission shifted to show a tactical display of local space. The 5 massive human vessels were not alone. Surrounding them were hundreds of smaller ships, emerging from stealth systems that had kept them hidden until now. Each one was broadcasting an energy signature that marked it as a serious threat to even the heaviest Council warships. You are wondering how many ships we have brought, Chen said, and, again Korath had the unsettling feeling that she was speaking directly to him. The answer is simple enough. We have had 4 centuries to prepare for this moment. While you were celebrating easy victories over divided enemies, we were building a war machine specifically designed to tear your empire apart. The tactical display expanded, showing the positions of Council ships throughout the Centauri system. The human fleet had positioned itself to control every major approach and retreat route. They had appeared not as raiders or explorers, but as conquerors who had studied their enemy extensively. To the crews of the Galactic Armada, Chen continued, you have a choice. Stand down your weapons and prepare to surrender your ships, and you will be treated according to the laws of war as practiced by civilized species. You will be fed, housed, and cared for until arrangements can be made for your repatriation to non-military roles. The alternative, and here Chen's voice grew cold as the void between stars, is to fight. And if you choose to fight, you will learn why humanity spent 4 centuries preparing for this war instead of 4 centuries finding peaceful solutions to our problems. You will discover what total war means when practiced by a species that has had to unify or die. Korath found his voice. Open a channel, he ordered. Sir? THYSS questioned. Open a channel to the human fleet. I want to speak with this Admiral Chen. Within moments, the communication link was established. Chen's face appeared on the viewscreen, and Korath found himself looking into eyes that held no hatred, no anger, only a kind of professional determination that was somehow more terrifying than rage would have been. Admiral Korath, Chen said, apparently recognizing him immediately. commander of the inevitable victory, veteran of 18 conquest campaigns, responsible for the integration of 47 species into the Council framework. We need it last. How do you know? Korath began, then stopped. The question was pointless. These humans had obviously been gathering intelligence for far longer than anyone had suspected. How do I know who you are? Chen completed the question. Admiral, we've been watching you specifically for over a decade. Your tactical innovations in siege warfare, your efficient integration protocols, your ability to break resistance through precisely applied force. You're very good at what you do. And, what do I do? Korath asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. You destroy civilizations, Chen replied without hesitation. Efficiently, thoroughly, and, with minimal waste of resources. It's quite impressive, from a military standpoint. But, you've never faced an opponent who had time to study your methods and develop countermeasures. Korath looked at the tactical display showing the human fleet. They were outnumbered, certainly. The Galactic Armada maintained over 300 ships in the Centauri system at any given time. But, something about the humans' positioning, their confidence, their apparent unconcern at being outnumbered suggested that they had advantages that weren't immediately apparent. You cannot hope to defeat the entire Galactic Armada with a single fleet, Korath said. A single fleet? Chen smiled, and the expression was not reassuring. Admiral, this isn't a single fleet. This is the opening move of a coordinated campaign that spans the entire galaxy. While we've been talking, similar forces have appeared in 17 other systems. Every major council stronghold, every crucial industrial center, every strategic choke point. We're not here to fight a series of battles, Admiral. We're here to fight one very large, very coordinated war. The implications of what Chen was saying hit Korath like a physical blow. A simultaneous, galaxy-wide assault on every major council position would require resources and coordination on a scale that seemed impossible for a single species to achieve. Even if that's true, Korath said, the council has had centuries to build defensive positions. Our fortifications are designed to repel conventional attacks from known weapon types, Chen interrupted. We've seen your fortifications, Admiral. We've studied their construction, analyzed their weaknesses, developed specific countermeasures. Your defenses are impressive against known threats. Unfortunately for you, humanity represents a completely unknown threat. Chen gestured, and the view screen shifted to show detailed schematics of council fortifications, not just the general layouts that might be available in public records, but complete technical specifications including shield frequencies, weapon placement, even the internal layout of command centers. How? Korath whispered. Trade ships, Chen replied. Exploration vessels. Mining operations. Even tourism, in some cases. Humanity has been infiltrating your empire for centuries, Admiral. We've had people working in your shipyards, serving on your crews, living on your worlds. Every piece of information we needed, we acquired through patience and planning. Korath realized with growing horror that the human assault wasn't just a military operation, it was the culmination of the most extensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history. They hadn't just been watching from a distance, they had been living among council species, learning everything there was to know about their technology, their tactics, their weaknesses. You want our surrender, Korath said. It wasn't a question. I want an end to an empire built on the subjugation of free peoples, Chen replied. If that can be achieved through surrender, excellent. If it requires war, we're prepared for that as well. But, one way or another, Admiral, the age of the Galactic Council ends today. Korath looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were professionals, veterans of dozens of campaigns. But, they were also facing something they had never encountered before, an enemy who had studied them for centuries, who had appeared simultaneously across the galaxy, who spoke not of conquest but of liberation. I need time to consider your terms, Korath said finally. Of course, Chen replied. You have 1 hour to make your decision. After that, we'll assume you've chosen war and proceed accordingly. The transmission ended, leaving Korath alone with his thoughts and the terrible realization that everything he had believed about the balance of power in the galaxy had just been proven wrong. The humans hadn't just prepared for war, they had prepared for this specific war, against this specific enemy, with a level of thoroughness that spoke of a fundamental difference in how they approached conflict. As he stared at the tactical display showing the human fleet, Karath began to understand that the galaxy was about to learn what happened when a species that had survived by fighting chose to take that fighting to the stars. Admiral Karath's hour of deliberation passed in a blur of frantic communications with High Command, desperate tactical assessments, and the slow realization that he was facing a choice between impossible alternatives. Surrender would mean the end of everything he had spent his life building and defending. But fighting meant facing an enemy that had spent 4 centuries preparing specifically for this moment. Admiral, Captain THYSS reported, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. High Command's response has arrived. Karath read the message with growing dread. Supreme Chancellor Vextar's orders were clear and absolute: no surrender. No negotiation. The prestige of the Council cannot be compromised by yielding to a primitive species, regardless of their apparent technological capabilities. Destroy the human fleet. Restore order. The galaxy is watching. Sir? THYSS asked, seeing the expression on his commander's face. High Command has made their decision, Karath replied grimly. All ships are to prepare for combat. We fight. Even as the orders went out across the galactic fleet, Karath couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a terrible mistake. The humans had demonstrated technological capabilities far beyond what should have been possible for their apparent development level. More than that, they had shown strategic planning that spanned centuries and intelligence gathering that had penetrated to the very heart of the Council's military operations. Enemy fleet is maintaining position, reported the tactical officer. No hostile actions detected, but their weapon systems are powered and ready. Karath studied the display showing the human formation. 5 massive dreadnoughts arranged in a pentagonal formation, with smaller vessels positioned at precise intervals around them. It looked almost ceremonial, as if they were conducting a parade rather than preparing for battle. Sir, THYSS said quietly, their positioning doesn't make sense from a tactical standpoint. They're presenting maximum target profiles and leaving themselves exposed to crossfire from multiple directions. It's either incompetence or they're so confident in their capabilities that they don't consider our weapons a significant threat, Karath finished. The possibility was chilling. All ships report ready for combat, Admiral, the communications officer announced. Karath took a deep breath. He had fought dozens of battles throughout his career, faced desperate enemies and overwhelming odds. But he had never fought an enemy that had specifically prepared to face him for centuries. Open a channel to Admiral Chen, he ordered. Chen's face appeared on the viewscreen, and Karath could see that she was now wearing what appeared to be combat armor beneath her uniform jacket. Her bridge crew was moving with the smooth efficiency of long practice, and weapon readiness indicators glowed softly in the background. Admiral Chen, Karath said formally, the Galactic Council cannot accept your terms. We will not surrender to threats from a species that refuses to accept the benefits of civilized order. Stand down your ships and submit to integration procedures, or face the consequences. Chen nodded, as if she had expected this response. I'm sorry to hear that, Admiral Karath. I had hoped that reason might prevail, but I understand that you have your orders. She paused, and, when she spoke again, her voice carried a note of genuine regret. For what it's worth, I respect you as a professional soldier. In another time, under different circumstances, we might have served together instead of against each other. But not today, Karath said. No, Chen agreed. Not today. Today, you represent everything that my species has spent 4 centuries preparing to destroy. Then, let us see which of our preparations proves superior, Karath replied. Chen saluted, a crisp, military gesture that Karath found himself returning instinctively. May the best military doctrine win, Admiral. The transmission ended, and Karath turned to his crew. All ships, execute attack pattern Delta 7. Target the largest human vessel first. Concentrate all firepower on breaking their formation. The Galactic Fleet moved with the precision of centuries of experience. Over 300 ships accelerated toward the human formation, their weapons charging and targeting systems locking onto the massive dreadnoughts. It was an overwhelming display of coordinated firepower that had broken the spirit of countless enemies before the first shot was fired. But, as the Council fleet closed to weapons range, something unprecedented happened. The human ships didn't retreat, didn't maneuver, didn't even adjust their formation. They simply sat there, waiting, as if 300 heavily armed warships were no more threatening than a cloud of space dust. "Target the lead dreadnought," Korath ordered. "All heavy cruisers, fire when ready." The opening salvo was devastating by any reasonable standard. Dozens of particle beam cannons, plasma torpedo launchers, and quantum disruptors focused their fire on the human vessel designated Warfather. The combined firepower was enough to reduce a planetary surface to molten slag, enough to punch through any known defensive system in the galaxy. The energy discharge was so intense that the tactical display temporarily whitened out from the overload. When the sensors cleared, Korath expected to see debris, wreckage, perhaps a severely damaged hull limping away from the battle. Instead, the Warfather hung in space exactly where it had been before, completely unharmed. Its shields hadn't even flickered. "Impossible," THYSS breathed. "Sensor analysis," Korath demanded. "Sir," the sensor officer reported, his voice shaking, "the human vessel appears to have absorbed the entire energy output of our opening salvo. No damage detected. No shield depletion. It's as if we weren't firing at them at all." Before Korath could process this information fully, the human fleet finally moved. Not the chaotic maneuvering of a fleet under attack, but the smooth, coordinated movement of a force implementing a carefully planned strategy. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," the communications officer announced. Admiral Chen appeared on the screen again, and this time she was smiling. Not with cruelty or triumph, but with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had just demonstrated a principle she had been trying to explain. "That was impressive firepower, Admiral," she said. "Very well coordinated, excellent target selection, good energy management. By the standards of conventional galactic warfare, it should have been devastating." "Then, why?" Korath began. "Why didn't it work?" Chen completed the question. "Because, Admiral, we didn't spend 4 centuries just studying your tactics. We spent 4 centuries studying your technology. Every weapon system you just fired at us, we've analyzed, tested, and developed specific countermeasures for. Our defensive systems were designed from the ground up to neutralize Council weapons." Shen gestured, and the view screen shifted to show a technical analysis of the human ship's hull. What Korath saw there made his blood run cold. The vessel wasn't just armored, it was constructed from materials that seemed to exist in a state of controlled quantum flux, actively adapting to incoming energy patterns and converting them into power for the ship's own systems. "Adaptive metamaterials," Chen explained. "Every shot you fire at us makes us stronger. It's quite elegant, really. We took your own weapons technology and used it as the foundation for our defensive systems." "That's impossible," Korath said, though even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't. "Admiral," Chen replied patiently, "your species conquered most of the galaxy by being very good at conventional warfare. But, you never faced an enemy that had time to make conventional warfare obsolete." As if to demonstrate her point, the human fleet finally returned fire. But what emerged from their weapon ports wasn't energy beams or torpedo salvos. Instead, streams of what appeared to be metallic dust shot out toward the Council ships at significant fractions of light speed. Kinetic accelerators, Korath realized with growing horror. "Very good," Chen's voice came over the calm, magnetically accelerated metallic particles traveling at 0.7 light speed. "Simple physics, really, but quite effective when you have the power generation capabilities to make it work." The first streams of accelerated particles struck the Council formation, and the results were immediate and catastrophic. Ships that had withstood decades of combat were sliced apart like paper, their armor and shields offering no more protection than empty space against projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The destroyer Vigilant Dawn simply disintegrated, its hull vaporized by the kinetic impact. The heavy cruiser Sword of Retribution lasted 3 seconds longer before a particle stream found its reactor core and turned the entire vessel into an expanding ball of superheated plasma. "Evasive maneuvers," Korath ordered, but he knew it was already too late. The human weapons weren't just devastating, they were precise. Each stream of particles was carefully targeted to strike critical systems, and, at the speeds they were traveling, no conventional evasion pattern could hope to avoid them. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "we're losing ships faster than I can track. Current casualty rate is approximately 30 vessels per minute. 30 ships per minute." Korath had seen slaughters before, but nothing on this scale. The human fleet was dismantling the pride of the Galactic Armada with the methodical efficiency of a demolition crew. "All ships, implement emergency retreat protocol," Korath ordered. "Fall back to the outer system. We need to reassess our tactical approach." But, as the surviving Council ships began their retreat, they discovered that the human fleet had prepared for this possibility as well. The smaller vessels that had been positioned around the Dreadnoughts suddenly revealed their true purpose. They were interdiction ships, each one carrying technology that could prevent faster-than-light travel in a significant area around them. "Sir," the navigation officer reported, "FTL drives are non-functional. We're trapped in normal space." Korath realized with growing despair that the humans hadn't just planned for a battle, they had planned for a complete victory. Every aspect of their strategy had been designed to prevent escape, to force a decisive engagement, to ensure that the Council fleet couldn't retreat to fight another day. "Admiral Chen," Korath transmitted. The human commander appeared on screen again, her expression now somber. "Yes, Admiral? I formally request the opportunity to surrender my fleet," Korath said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Chen replied. "Your High Command made it very clear that surrender was not an acceptable option. I'm simply respecting their wishes." "My crew," Korath said desperately. "They're soldiers following orders. They don't deserve to die for the mistakes of politicians." Chen's expression softened slightly. "You're right, Admiral. They don't." She paused, considering. "Any ship that powers down its weapons and transmits a surrender code will be spared. Their crews will be taken as prisoners of war and treated according to civilized standards. But the ships themselves must be abandoned." Korath looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were professionals, veterans, loyal servants of the Council. But they were also beings with families, hopes, dreams that didn't deserve to end in the fire of a one-sided battle. "All ships," he transmitted on the fleet frequency, "this is Admiral Korath. Any captain who wishes to surrender his vessel may do so without prejudice. Power down weapons and transmit surrender codes. This is not an order, it's a choice each captain must make for himself." One by one, the surviving Council ships began powering down their weapons. The slaughter stopped as ship after ship transmitted surrender codes and prepared to abandon their vessels. Of the 300 ships that had begun the battle, fewer than 50 remained intact enough to surrender. "A wise choice, Admiral," Chen said when the last surrender code had been transmitted. "Your crews will be well treated." "And my ship?" Korath asked. "Will be destroyed, along with all other Council military vessels. We can't risk them being retaken and used against liberated worlds." Korath nodded. He had expected as much. "Admiral Chen, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why?" Korath asked. "Why go to all this effort? Why spend 4 centuries preparing for war when you could have simply hidden and let the galaxy take care of itself?" Chen was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Because, Admiral, freedom isn't something you can preserve by hiding from those who would destroy it. Sometimes, if you want peace, you have to be willing to fight the war that ends all wars." As Korath and his crew prepared to abandon the inevitable victory, he found himself thinking about Chen's words. The humans had chosen to spend 4 centuries not just preparing for war, but preparing for this specific war against this specific enemy. They had sacrificed their own peaceful development to become a weapon aimed at the heart of galactic tyranny. The battle for Centauri Prime was over. But, as Korath watched the human fleet move toward the planet itself, he realized that the war was just beginning. And, for the first time in his career, he found himself wondering whether the civilization he had spent his life defending was worth the price that had been paid for it. The humans had won more than a battle, they had demonstrated that the age of easy conquest was over. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an empire built on fear faced a species that had learned to weaponize hope itself. 6 months after the Battle of Centauri Prime, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. What the humans had called Operation Homecoming had succeeded beyond even their most optimistic projections. 17 major council strongholds had fallen simultaneously in the opening phase, each one to a precisely planned assault by human forces that had appeared as if from nowhere. But the real shock had come in the aftermath. Rather than occupying the worlds they had liberated, the humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had simply left. After destroying the Council's military installations and governmental structures, they had turned control over to the native populations and moved on to the next target. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Warfather, looking out at the planet below. Rigel 7 had been one of the Council's primary industrial centers, its native crystalline population forced to work in massive manufacturing complexes that produced weapons for the Armada. Now, for the first time in 3 centuries, the crystal beings were free to determine their own destiny. "Admiral," reported Captain Martinez, Chen's chief of staff. "Final reports from all fleet commanders. Operation Homecoming Phase 1 is complete. 47 Council systems liberated, with total human casualties at less than 3,000. Council military forces have been effectively neutralized across the entire galactic arm." Chen nodded, but her expression remained serious. "And the political situation?" "More complex," Martinez admitted. "Some species are adapting well to freedom. The Rigelians have already established a representative government and are beginning to rebuild their industrial base for peaceful purposes. The vegan colonies have formed a confederation of independent worlds. But others are struggling," Chen finished. "How many species are requesting continued human protection?" "Approximately 60% of the liberated populations," Martinez replied. 3 centuries of council rule has left many species without the infrastructure or experience needed for self-governance. They're afraid that without protection, they'll be reconquered." Chen turned from the viewport to face her aide. "And what's the status of the council's core territories?" "Collapsing faster than our most optimistic projections suggested," Martinez said, consulting his data pad. "Supreme Chancellor Vextar was killed in the assault on Centauri Prime. The council government has fractured into competing factions, each claiming legitimate authority. Several core worlds have declared independence. Others are fighting civil wars between loyalist and liberation forces. Any sign of organized resistance?" "Some. Admiral Karath has been released from prisoner status and is attempting to form a legitimate government from the moderate council factions. He's actually been quite helpful. His proposal for voluntary confederation has gained support among species that want to maintain some form of central coordination without returning to the old imperial system." Chen smiled slightly. Karath had surprised everyone, including himself, by becoming one of the most effective advocates for peaceful transition. His first-hand experience of human military capabilities had convinced him that the old ways were not only morally wrong, but practically impossible to maintain. "And the troublemakers?" she asked. "Primarily the Dominion faction, led by War Marshal Theclor. They've gathered about 200 surviving council ships and are attempting to re-establish imperial control over the Rim territories. They're calling it the Great Reclamation and claiming that humanity represents an existential threat to galactic civilization." Chen nodded grimly. She had expected this. Not every council leader would accept the end of their empire gracefully, and some would undoubtedly attempt to rebuild through force. This was why Phase 2 of the operation had always been necessary. "Current location of Theclor's fleet?" "They've established a base in the Arcturus system and are attempting to retake the former Rim colonies. So far they've managed to reoccupy 3 systems, but they're meeting significant resistance from local populations who remember their previous liberation." "And our response?" Martinez smiled. "The Defiance and Retribution battle groups are already en route. Admiral Kim estimates contact in approximately 6 days." Chen turned back to the viewport, watching as small craft rose from the planet's surface, crystalline vessels of their own design, built for exploration and trade rather than war. It was a beautiful sight, but it also represented the challenge they now faced. Liberation was only the beginning. Building a stable, peaceful galaxy from the ruins of the Council's empire would be far more difficult than tearing that empire down. Admiral, Martinez continued, there's something else. We're receiving reports of human settlements throughout the former Council territories. Settlements? Civilian populations. Apparently, the humans who had been living undercover in Council space for the past centuries are now revealing themselves. Many of them are choosing to remain on the worlds where they've made their homes, helping with the transition to self-governance. Chen raised an eyebrow. This was an unexpected development, though perhaps it shouldn't have been. The intelligence network that had made Operation Homecoming possible had required thousands of human agents living deep undercover for decades or even centuries. It made sense that some of them would have put down roots. How are the local populations reacting? Better than expected. Most species seem grateful for the assistance, especially from humans who understand both their local situations and the broader galactic context. There are even reports of interspecies cooperation projects that would have been impossible under Council rule. Chen felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with victory in battle. This was what they had really been fighting for, not just the destruction of tyranny, but the creation of something better in its place. Admiral, the ship's communication officer interrupted, incoming priority transmission from Earth Command. Put it through. The viewscreen flickered to life, showing the familiar face of Fleet Admiral Peterson, the elderly human who had overseen the entire liberation campaign from Earth. His expression was serious but pleased. Sarah, he said without preamble, congratulations on Phase 1. The President and the Council of Earth are extremely pleased with the results. Thank you, sir. What are our orders for Phase 2? Complete the cleanup, Peterson replied. Theclor and his faction represent the last organized resistance to liberation. Once they're dealt with, we can begin the transition to long-term peacekeeping operations. And, after that? Peterson smiled, and Chen could see the weight of centuries of preparation lifting from his shoulders. After that, Admiral, we go home. The galaxy doesn't need human rulers any more than it needed Council overlords. Our job is to ensure that every species has the opportunity to choose its own path, not to choose that path for them. The transmission ended, and Chen found herself thinking about Peterson's words. Go home. After 4 centuries of preparation, after a campaign that had reshaped the galaxy, humanity would return to Earth and let the rest of the galaxy find its own way forward. Admiral, Martinez said quietly, do you think it will work? Can the galaxy really govern itself without some form of central authority? Chen considered the question carefully. I don't know, she admitted. But I know that forcing unity through conquest doesn't work. The Council proved that. At least now every species will have the chance to succeed or fail on their own terms. A week later, the final chapter of the Council Wars played out in the Arcturus system. War Marshal Theclor had chosen his final battleground well, a fortified system with multiple defensive platforms and natural choke points that should have given his fleet every advantage. But he was fighting an enemy that had spent 4 centuries studying every possible defensive configuration. The human assault was swift, precise, and utterly devastating. Adaptive metamaterial hulls turned the defensive platform's own weapons against them. Relativistic kinetic accelerators punched through shields and armor that had been designed to stop conventional energy weapons. And, most importantly, the human forces fought with the coordination and determination of a species that had unified around a single, unwavering principle, that freedom was worth any sacrifice. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, Theclor's fleet was gone, and, with it the last organized attempt to restore the old imperial order. The War Marshal himself was captured alive, though he spent his remaining days insisting that humanity had doomed the galaxy to chaos and conflict. But, as the months passed, it became clear that the opposite was true. Without the heavy hand of imperial control, species across the galaxy began to rediscover their own cultures, their own ways of solving problems, their own approaches to interstellar relations. Trade networks emerged based on mutual benefit rather than imperial mandate. Scientific cooperation flourished as species shared knowledge freely instead of hoarding it for military advantage. There were conflicts, of course. Some species discovered that they had irreconcilable differences with their neighbors. Some worlds experienced civil wars as different factions struggled for control. But these conflicts remained local rather than galactic in scope, and they were resolved through negotiation, mediation, and occasionally limited warfare rather than the systematic genocide that had characterized Council pacification operations. Admiral Chen returned to Earth 2 years after the Battle of Centauri Prime, but she found that home was not quite what she had left. The planet that had spent 4 centuries preparing for war was now struggling to adapt to peace. Military production facilities were being converted to civilian purposes. The massive underground cities built to survive orbital bombardment were being transformed into centers of learning and culture. Most significantly, Earth itself was changing. After 4 centuries of isolation, humanity was finally ready to take its place in the galactic community, not as conquerors or rulers, but as equals among the many species that called the galaxy home. Chen's final act as a military commander was to oversee the decommissioning of the war dreadnoughts that had broken the Council's power. The massive ships that had been humanity's sword and shield were broken down, their advanced materials used to build exploration vessels, research stations, and the infrastructure of peace. Standing in the observation lounge of the orbital station where the Warfather was being carefully dismantled, Chen reflected on what they had accomplished. The galaxy was free, truly free for the first time in centuries. Every species could choose its own destiny, forge its own path among the stars, build its own future without the weight of imperial oppression. It hadn't been perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was better than what had come before, and it offered hope for what might come after. As the last sections of the great warship were guided toward the recycling facilities, Chen received a message on her personal communication device. It was from Admiral Karath, now serving as the elected coordinator of the Galactic Cooperation Council, a voluntary organization that facilitated communication and trade between independent worlds. Admiral Chen, the message read, "The Council is meeting next month to discuss the establishment of joint exploration missions to the Galactic Core. Several species have expressed interest in peaceful contact with civilizations beyond our current reach. We would be honored if humanity chose to participate." Chen smiled as she composed her reply. "We would be delighted to join such an expedition. After all, we've spent quite enough time preparing for war. Perhaps it's time to prepare for wonders instead." The message sent, Chen turned from the viewport and walked toward the shuttle that would take her home to Earth. The galaxy was free, humanity had kept its promise to fight for liberty wherever it was threatened, and now they could all move forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. The age of empire was over. The age of exploration was about to begin. And, in the vast darkness between the stars, 1 billion worlds turned in their orbits, each one free to determine its own destiny among the infinite possibilities of the cosmos.